Today, I have this Tyco C630, which I'm going to be attempting to repair. However, this is no typical Tyco power torque unit, as at some point in this model's history, it has been fitted with a second power torque motor drive in the rear of the unit, and we're going to be trying to fix this. As I just mentioned, it'll probably be riddled with issues, but the only way to find out what's wrong with this, first of all, is to test the thing out. The unit is set up. I will give the thing some power and we'll see what it does. I'm going to turn up the power gradually. And let's see if we can get it moving the other direction. So obviously we have at least one motor that's working and moving the model a little bit. I'd almost want to bet that the second motor isn't running, and the one that is running sounds pretty terrible. It definitely needs some fresh oil, and we have headlights in both directions. So this model is getting power, and I think unless there's something weird going on with the wiring, it might just need a good cleanup to get both of these trucks moving again. Before we start tearing this unit down, why don't I give you a run around of this model and give you a look around the whole thing. And just in case anyone was wondering, this unit came from a lot of other uniquely modified locomotives that I got off eBay a while back. But now it's time to go around the shell of this locomotive, and it is actually in shockingly good shape. You may be able to tell that it's been custom painted. It's not difficult to tell that. There's some brush strokes and whatnot here. You can also see the edges of these decals. But given the age of this locomotive, I think it actually looks really nice. Sure, there are some imperfections, but all the custom decal work, the paint work, and even painting the trucks and all that looks really nice. Again, there's not really any defects. You can kind of see where some of these decals are starting to yellow. On the back of the model, the class lights have even been painted on, which is a really nice touch. And the other thing I do really want to note, in addition to the side frames, the truck covers, and the fuel tank being painted, the handrails are also painted. Very rarely are these old Tyco units ever complete with their handrails, and it is incredibly rare for anyone to have put in the effort to paint them. So I think that's a really neat little step. These seem very securely mounted in place, and it makes this model actually look really good. The horn on top is also complete and intact, and going around to the other side, it's more of the same story. It just kind of looks like an engine that was painted a long time ago, potentially by hand, at least on the roof, but there's really nothing to complain about here. I think it's a very nice looking piece. Flipping this model over, we can see that it's a much earlier power torque unit, as this weight is still screwed into place and it says mean to a Tyco down here. Something that is a little bit odd is that these trucks seem to be from different eras of the power torque. This looks to be an old Mantua style one to me. However, the one over here looks to be a much more modern power torque unit. So it's interesting that they got these to work together. Another thing worth noting is that we're missing a screw here. That's not anything difficult to repair, but it's kind of odd that that one is just missing. Down in here, I don't know how well the lighting will capture it, but it looks like there's actually some pretty fresh and new wiring down in there. So I don't know if we'll have any wiring issues or whatnot, but that's something to be aware of. A lot of it looks pretty new, so maybe this was done fairly recently. One final thing of note is the traction tires. The wear on the tires on the front of the unit and the rear of the unit look very different. On the rear back here, you can see some of these tires look pretty worn out. I'm assuming I will bare minimum have to replace these three. The ones up front actually look pretty nice. I don't know if I will replace these as well while we're in here, but I think these are still doing their job just fine. They feel pretty rubbery to me. It doesn't feel like they're cracking or anything like that. So we'll see, and we will figure it out when we get there. Before we get to that, though, I want to get this model fully torn down. I want to remove the weight and both of the trucks out of the unit. Then we can test these trucks out, see if there's anything odd going on there, and then we can go from there, most likely tearing down one truck at a time. So all of our pieces are now out of the shell, but while I was taking everything out, I had a little bit of a casualty, as you may have seen. the front coupler has actually broken off of the truck. I forgot that it was clipped in place like that, and I went to pull the truck out, and this just kind of snapped off. So that was a mistake on my part. However, this piece is actually designed a little bit differently than some of the newer Tyco models. As you can see right here, this one is just kind of securely mounted in place. It might actually be a very similar design. I've just never noticed this. It's got two little clips, so really all this piece does is it clips into this little hole right here. So that should be easy enough to fix with a little bit of glue. That coupler does not have to be perfect, but I'm kind of annoyed with myself that I broke it. So I had a quick pause just to take a look at everything that's going on with the wiring around these two trucks, and I found a pair of much larger issues than I was expecting, both of which are on this truck. So let me bring it in closer to show you both of them. The first of those issues is this one little pivot gear right here. When I took the model apart and took a look, I found that this gear is actually really loose, and it can slide straight off. If it's loose on this shaft here, it means power is not getting transferred from this gear to the gearbox, which means this thing is for sure not going to move. I think this may have been our motor truck that was making all those weird, obnoxious noises and sounding like it needed oil, and I think this one was actually running pretty well. But after making that discovery, I noticed something much bigger that could derail this entire project. This pivot here for this gear is actually broken off. There is really no way to fix this originally with these original parts. Some people have used super glue, but I haven't seen that work very well. And short of essentially replacing the block, there's not really a good way to do this. Unfortunately for me, I do not have a spare motor block, so I've devised a different solution which I'm going to experiment with on this model. My solution, which I'll be experimenting with, relies on this one gear here and this one self-tapping screw. I've done some experimenting just a little bit to make sure that this screw will fit, and it's a little bit larger than this gear. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to bore out one of these old Tyco gears just enough for the screw to fit through it. The screw is also long enough to tap into the motor casing, so I'm going to use my rotary tool, which is currently charging, just to drill a little hole exactly where the pivot used to be that this little screw can tap into, and I think that should hold everything intact. I've done a similar repair on a lifelike unit, however, that was plastic, and I think that was a little less high stakes than this. But if this works, it's going to be a huge win for me, and it'll solve this problem for many future engines to come. So now let's take a look at the wiring that's been done to this thing. We'll start with the rear truck, the one that has that one pivot issue. This one, as you can see, it looks actually pretty clean. There has been a little bit of paint over here. I would assume that's from when this model was getting painted in the past. But we got the wire that runs from the truck itself to the headlight, because on these Tyco units, this one screw here taps directly into the casing, which picks up power and provides power to this plate, which goes straight to the brush. On the other unit, it is a wire that runs all the way back and is tied into this motor casing right here, and that seems to work pretty well. Both the headlights work, which means we got power flowing both ways. I think on the other unit, it looks a little bit more sketchy than on this one, because here we have this one little piece here that is tapped again into the motor casing with a little bit of a pickup, and that's what runs into the other truck right here and is soldered directly onto here. This one to me looks a lot more sketchy. This plate looks like it had just been soldered directly onto, and it's a little bit warped. Again, this is the truck that actually ran, so I'm not too concerned about it if it works. If not, I've got a bunch of replacement plate covers we can use. Other than that, there's nothing too out of the ordinary here. We have this one blue wire, which goes from this piece right here, which I just showed you running from the other truck, and it goes straight to the headlight, which kind of looks a little bit melted, but it was still working, so I'm going to leave it alone. Now that we got this stuff out, I want to make sure that both of these trucks actually spin over. We can kind of watch the pivot gear on this one, because that's the truck I'm most concerned about. So I've zoomed in quite a bit. I really just want to see if this one pivot here is spinning. That's what I'm most concerned about. We already know this one here moves, but let's give it some power and see if I can see any motion. And I can feel both of those moving, so we definitely have power going to both trucks, and both motors are turning over, which is a very good sign. Now that we know for sure both of these motors are capable of turning over, I'm going to start working on this truck, because finding out that there were no wiring issues and instead mechanical issues with this one truck here made that decision a lot easier. So while my rotary tool is charging so we can tear into this and see if we can fix that pivot, we're going to work on this, and then while we're working on this other truck here, we can let the glue dry on the coupler that I fixed off. So this should be a win-win scenario. So the first power torque drive has been fully taken apart, and in here everything actually looks really good. The thing I was most concerned about was this one motor plate. As you can see, it is a little bit warped right up here, but it looks pretty clean. It seems like it hasn't damaged anything important, and I'm going to leave that alone because I suspect it can work just fine. In terms of the power torque casing and the motor itself, the motor looks to be pretty filthy. It's going to need a very good cleanup, but it was turning over. Again, a good sign. The gearing and all of the little bearings and all that look pretty clean compared to some of the other Tyco units I worked on, which is pretty good. The springs that came out of this unit look to be a little bit lighter in color than what I'm used to, but they don't seem compressed or anything. And then the brushes here, again, don't seem to be in bad shape whatsoever. They're just kind of dirty, which is typical. And as you were probably able to see, the wheel sets and gears that came out of the model were also in quite good condition. So now it's time to clean up all these components, and I'm going to start with the motor casing and the motor itself. We're going to use a fiberglass pencil, some little brush pick things, and some rubbing alcohol and Q-tips to clean off the commutator. Then to clean off the whole motor block, the gears, the wheels, the truck cover, all that, we're going to just use some rubbing alcohol and Q-tips. And then for oil and lubricant, when we put this thing back together, I'm just going to be using some Labelle 107. Now, before I go in and clean out the gears and the wheel sets and all that, I do want to get these springs and brushes seated properly back into the motor casing, give the motor bearings a little bit of fresh oil, and just test the thing out. To help with that, I made this little tool ages ago. It's just a piece of styrene with a hole cut in it, and this makes it a lot easier to just kind of sit the springs, brushes in here, push them down like this, and then pop the motor truck back over them with as little issue as possible. So the motor's back together and that casing is cleaned. I was going to show you this thing getting just a test run on the bench. However, I forgot that this one is still hooked up to it, and this one still makes an obnoxiously loud noise, So there would really be no point in doing this. You wouldn't be able to really hear or see anything happening with this. But I've tested it, I verified that it runs, and now it's time to clean up the gears, the wheels, and the truck cover. Before I started working on these wheel sets, I decided to pause and take a look at their traction tires, and I've decided to remove them and replace them with some of the dental bands I have laying around. I decided they look just a little bit worn out and I can probably replace them. I'm going to do this off camera after we clean up the wheels just because it's tedious and I don't think you want to watch me do that. But once those are in place and these are clean, we're going to put everything back together in this truck using some Labelle 107. Then we're going to glue the coupler box in place and this truck should be good to go. Before we put this all back together, I did want to mention one thing. When we first got the model, I noticed that this screw down here was missing, and I found it when we were taking everything apart at the start of the video. It was just kind of stuck to the magnet of the motor. So we have the original screw, and we can reuse this. I just took a little bit of a break and off camera I experimented with this gear while the glue on the coupler was drying. It's still not fully dry, but what I have done is I figured out the size I needed to bore out this gear. So it now sits on here and spins freely on this little just test piece of plastic. I also figured out the size of drill bit I would need to drill a hole for the screw to tap into. So all of that is figured out, and now we can move on to this truck. The game plan here is going to be a little bit different than the first time, just so I can have a fail-safe in place. I'm going to tear everything down, as I did on the first truck. The only real difference is I'm going to remove this one pivot gear here, so we can pull the entire motor and armature out of there. Then we're going to attempt to drill into here and get this gear and screw mounted in position. If that fails, since everything will be apart, all I'll need to do is clean up the motor casing, put the wheels in place, and then just call it a dummy truck until I get either a new motor block, new parts, or something to fix it. And if it is successful, we'll clean everything up as we did normally, put this back together, and see if it all runs. It's now a little while later, and I have solved the pivot issue, and ironically enough, I had to pivot paths while I was working on this because the self-tapper I tried to use originally would not work. The thread pattern just did not like to line up with this Tyco casing. I instead tapped in a 256, which does not look as factory for a Tyco. I would like to find some more Tyco-esque screws. These self-tappers do a really good job of looking a lot like the similar factory screws, but I want to find something a little nicer looking because I think it'll make a big difference when I'm working on a lot of these old models. But really, it was pretty simple. I just tapped this straight in, screwed it into place, and I just kind of test fit the thing with the gear down here, the main gear we had the issue with, and our other little pivot gear up here. And as you can see, when I turn this over by hand, it spins freely, which is pretty good. Now, I've just got to completely undo all the work I just did. We'll start cleaning out the commutator with my fiberglass pencil, then we'll clean up the commutator itself again, and the motor casing, gears, and wheels with some rubbing alcohol. So, let's get to that just like we did on the other truck. Before we put the front motor plate back on, I did just want to mention that I replaced the springs with some new ones I had laying around, well, parts out of an old engine. The ones that came out of this unit were very compressed, and I don't think they're going to do their job very well. Now that both of these are put back together, I'm just going to test this one out. This one shouldn't be squealing anymore too. I just gave it a little fresh oil. Let's see if this one will start. I know for a fact this one should as well. And clearly that one also starts. It for sure would have helped if I wasn't laying it on its side and essentially making it so the motor was seized up, but it does run and that's a very good sign. Now all we've really got left to do is to clean up these wheel sets and these two gears. Since I had already cleaned this one up while I was working on it, we don't really need to worry about this one. We'll set it off to the side and install it when needed. And then once everything is in with a little bit of Labelle 107, we need to glue this pivot gear in place. Before I go trying to cram both of these drive units back into the shell, let's test them out and make sure they actually work first. I'll give it some power. For sure in reverse, let's see if they both go forward this time. It looks like the front truck might be a little bit slower, but I don't think it's going to be too drastic once they're both in the locomotive. Plus, I think a good break-in is probably going to help. Now, the final 3 steps. First, we need to screw the headlights into the shell of the locomotive. Then, we need to clip both of the trucks into the shell of the locomotive. And finally, we need to screw the weight again into the shell of this unit. So this engine is now finally reassembled and it's back on the tracks. I did give up on reinstalling those coupler boxes. As you may have seen, they fell out as I was putting the engine back in place, and I decided enough was enough. I'll deal with those later. But it's time to test the thing out. I'll give it plenty of power just to see what it does. And it springs straight to life. I think the sound that I'm hearing there, I don't know if you can hear it, but it sounds like there's a little bit of a grinding going on. I think the little screw I installed to fix that one gear in place might be rubbing against the body of the locomotive. I would like to revisit this in the future once I have a parts engine, so we can either swap that rear truck with another dummy truck, or ideally a fresh power unit. Now, let's see what it does in reverse. And it seems to be much quieter in reverse. So for now, I think this is going to be considered a done video. I may come back and revisit this locomotive in the future once I get some more parts. So stay tuned, I want to continue making this thing better.